HOA President Linda Markham thought she could bully a blind teenager into repainting his family's fence, or else drown them in relentless fines. Armed with a smug grin and a clipboard full of so-called community standards, she believed she was untouchable. But Mike Thompson wasn't one to be intimidated. He had a plan, and once the cameras started rolling, the country saw firsthand the HOA's cold-hearted tactics. What followed? A storm of poetic justice that Linda never saw coming. Just 2 days after the first notice, a second letter arrived, this one even more outrageous. The fine had escalated to a staggering $750 per week for so-called non-compliance. Mike stood frozen, disbelief spreading across his face as he read it. They were serious. He let out a bitter chuckle. So this was their game? He was more than ready to play. Mike didn't wait for the next HOA meeting. He forced one. 2 days later, he stormed into the community boardroom, violation letters in one hand and his phone in the other, ready to document everything. The board sat in a neat row, clearly annoyed before he even spoke. Linda, seated like a queen in the center, wore that same smug smile as if victory was already hers. Mike tossed the letters onto the table. "Explain this," he demanded. Linda barely glanced at them. "It's standard procedure, Mr. Thompson. Your fence is not compliant. My son is blind," Mike snapped. "You're demanding a disabled child paint a fence, or you'll keep fining us. That's not enforcement. That's harassment." Linda sighed dramatically, like she was the one being burdened. "Rules are rules, Mr. Thompson." Mike stepped forward, voice rising. "Show me the rule that says a blind child has to paint a fence to satisfy your ridiculous checklist." Silence filled the room. Some board members shifted uncomfortably. Even Tim, who always sided with Linda, looked uneasy. "But Linda?" She just smiled wider. "Everyone is expected to contribute equally to the community," she said coolly. "Your son isn't exempt. If we make exceptions, we open the door for everyone else to ask the same." Mike slammed his hands on the table, causing the papers to scatter. "This isn't about the fence. You just want to make our lives miserable." Some flinched. One coughed nervously. Linda still sat unfazed, fingers laced in front of her. "Mr. Thompson, if you continue to be confrontational, we'll be forced to escalate this further." Mike stared her down, fury in his chest. Fine. If they wouldn't back off, either would he. That night, he sat beside his son Ethan on the porch, staring at the fence. It was a bit worn, sure, but hardly a hazard. Certainly not worth this mess. "How bad is it?" Ethan asked, sitting beside him. "They've raised the fines again," Mike muttered. $750 a week. Ethan gave a low whistle. "Didn't realize faded paint was such a threat to the community." Mike couldn't help but laugh. Even now, Ethan found a way to lighten the mood. "I can do it," Ethan said suddenly. Mike turned. "Absolutely not." Ethan shrugged. "Why not?" "I'd need help, sure. But it's not like it's impossible." Mike's heart ached. "You shouldn't have to." "I know," Ethan said gently. "But I can." Mike opened his mouth to protest, but stopped. Ethan sat tall, jaw set with determination. This wasn't about the fence anymore. This was about standing up. "Okay," Mike said. "But we do it our way." And he meant it. If the HOA wanted attention, they were going to get it. Mike spent the next week making calls. First to a local news station. His friend there loved an underdog story. Then to a disability rights group, who were horrified by what they heard. Finally, he talked to the neighbors, many of whom had their own horror stories about Linda's reign. The response was swift. "Tell us when. Tell us where." That Saturday, the entire neighborhood turned up. What happened next? Linda never saw it coming. The notice was clear. A fine of 750 Indian rupees per week would now be imposed until the issue was resolved. Any further defiance might lead to legal action. Mike stood motionless, reading the letter as disbelief turned into a bitter smile. So that's how they wanted to play? Fine. They picked the wrong family. He didn't wait for the next scheduled HOA meeting. He demanded one immediately. 2 days later, he walked into the boardroom, a dull, beige room inside the community center, holding the violation letters in one hand and his phone ready to record in the other. The HOA board sat in a neat, smug little row, eyes already filled with annoyance before a single word left his mouth. And right in the center, like a self-appointed queen, was Linda Markham, oozing arrogance with that trademark smirk, confident she'd already won. Mike skipped the formalities. He threw the letters onto the table, paper fluttering everywhere. Explain this. Linda glanced at them for half a second. It's a routine notice, Mr. Thompson. Your fence is... The fence? Mike snapped, voice slicing through the room. You're demanding a blind child repaint a fence, or else we get fined. That's not a rule. That's discrimination. Linda sighed, like she was inconvenienced by having to explain herself. The rules apply to all residents, Mr. Thompson. Mike stepped closer, his voice growing sharper. Show me the rule that says a disabled teenager has to perform manual labor to appease your petty checklist. Silence fell. Several board members squirmed in their seats. A few looked away. Even Tim, who usually nodded along with whatever Linda said, looked uneasy. But Linda? She just smiled wider. Community involvement is expected from every household, she said smoothly. If we make an exception for your son, then others will demand the same. Mike slammed his palms onto the table. The papers scattered again. This isn't about community, he growled. This is about you. Trying to make our lives miserable. A couple of board members flinched. Someone at the far end cleared their throat awkwardly. Linda, calm as ever, folded her hands. If you continue this aggressive behavior, she said, we'll be forced to take additional measures. Mike stared at her, chest rising and falling. They weren't backing off. So neither would he. That evening, he sat on the front porch, eyes fixed on the fence bathed in the glow of a nearby street lamp. The wood was aged, sure, but hardly the disgrace the HOA was painting it out to be. Ethan came out and sat beside him on the swing. How bad is it? He asked, too calm for a kid in the middle of a neighborhood war. Mike sighed and ran a hand over his face. They're up to 750 Indian rupees a week now. Ethan let out a low whistle. Didn't know peeling paint was such a threat to society. Mike laughed. That was Ethan, able to cut through chaos with a joke. But then came silence, and a new kind of strength in his son's voice. I can do it, Dad. Mike turned to him sharply. No. Ethan just shrugged. Why not? Sure, I'll need help, you know, with the whole not seeing thing, but it's not impossible. Mike's heart clenched. You shouldn't have to. I know, Ethan replied, grinning just a little. But I can. Mike opened his mouth, ready to protest again. To say this wasn't about offense anymore, it was about dignity. About standing up to people like Linda. But then he looked at Ethan, sitting straight, chin lifted, filled with quiet courage. Mike let out a long breath. Okay, he said finally. But we do this on our terms. If the HOA wanted a public spectacle, they were about to get one. Mike spent the next week laying the groundwork. First, he contacted a local news station. A friend of his worked there, and if there was one thing the media loved, it was a story about the underdog taking on a bully. Especially when the villain was a controlling HOA president. Next, he reached out to a disability rights organization. Their response was swift and furious. The idea of a blind teen being forced to repaint a fence under financial threat had them ready to raise their voices. Finally, he rallied the neighborhood. Many of them had their own HOA horror stories, parking citations, arbitrary lawn violations, or worse. The second they heard what was happening to Ethan, they were all in. Just tell us when and where, they said. That Saturday, the block came alive. By midday, Mike's front yard was packed. Neighbors brought coffee, folding chairs, and umbrellas like it was a local fair. Some carried handmade protest signs, Let the kid live. HOA bullies never win. Linda, you've gone too far. Then the news van pulled up. A reporter and cameraman got out, setting up equipment as whispers of excitement spread through the crowd. Mike's phone buzzed, a message from the advocacy group. We're watching. If they try anything, we'll respond. Perfect. He turned to Ethan, who stood beside him, cane in hand. You still sure? He asked. Ethan smiled. Dad? I'm blind. Not breakable. Hand me the brush. Mike smirked, passed him the paint roller, and nodded. All right. Let's show them. Ethan had barely dipped his roller into the paint when it began. The sharp click of high heels on pavement cut through the hum of chatter. All heads turned. Storming down the sidewalk like a hurricane in human form came Linda Markham, flanked by 2 HOA board members. Her signature smug smile was gone, replaced by a face twisted with rage. Mike had never seen her move that fast. She barreled through the crowd, pushing past neighbors like a celebrity denied entry to her own party. What is going on here? She barked, voice shrill. Mike didn't even glance at her. He kept calmly rolling paint onto the fence, unbothered. Community involvement, he said coolly. Exactly what you asked for. A news reporter stepped forward, microphone in hand. Mess. Markham, can you confirm reports that you find this family, and required their blind son to repaint the fence himself? Linda froze. Her expression faltered as the camera turned to her. This is a misunderstanding. She stammered, suddenly realizing how bad this looked on camera. But it was too late. The recorders were running. The crowd was watching. The HOA's actions were exposed. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Mike could feel it. Momentum had shifted. They were winning. By Monday, the situation was no longer a quiet neighborhood dispute. It was a national scandal. The footage of Ethan, calmly painting while his father stood beside him, explaining the situation to a furious HOA president, spread like wildfire. At first, it was just the local news. Then national outlets picked it up. When the video hit social media, the internet exploded. The headlines were merciless. Power-tripping HOA forces blind teen to paint fence. HOA president gets publicly shamed after targeting disabled child. Watch a petty bureaucrat get destroyed on live TV. Twitter erupted. This is beyond abuse of power. How is this real? That poor kid. His dad? Absolute legend. Imagine throwing your whole career away, over a fence. Facebook was even more brutal. The HOA's once silent page, typically used to nag residents about lawn care and parking, was now a war zone. Thousands of furious messages poured in. Shame on you. You should be ashamed of yourselves. Resign. Now. And the outrage didn't stop with the comments section. Disability rights organizations jumped in, demanding a formal investigation for potential ADA violations. Civil rights lawyers began offering to represent Mike and Ethan pro bono. Even celebrities took notice. One well-known activist posted, "Forcing a blind teen to paint a fence? This is why people despise HOAs. Be better." By Tuesday, the pressure became unbearable. The HOA tried to save face. They issued a hollow statement, full of corporate buzzwords and empty regret. "We deeply regret the misunderstanding and remain committed to fostering an inclusive community." Mike read it twice. No apology. No mention of Ethan. The internet wasn't buying it. The HOA's phone lines were flooded. Board members were overwhelmed by emails, angry visits, and media calls. Then came the knockout punch. The town's mayor released a public statement. "The treatment of the Thompson family is unacceptable. My office will ensure this never happens again in our community." And just like that, everything unraveled. By Wednesday afternoon, the HOA called an emergency board meeting. Within the hour, the fines against the Thompsons were erased. A formal public apology was issued, this time addressed directly to Mike and Ethan. And Linda Markham? Forced to resign. The self-crowned queen of the HOA had been dethroned. By week's end, the internet had moved on to its next outrage. But for Mike and Ethan, the battle had never been about revenge. It was about standing up for what was right. That Friday, in the soft warmth of an early afternoon sun, Ethan dipped his brush into the paint one last time and completed the fence. The neighborhood gathered again, not in protest, but in quiet celebration. Some clapped. Some smiled. A few walked over to shake Mike's hand. He stood back, arms folded, pride swelling in his chest. One of the first reporters to cover their story knelt beside Ethan and held out a microphone. "So," she asked gently, "after everything that happened, how do you feel?" Ethan paused, then gave a knowing smile. "I hope they learned something today." And Mike? He had never, ever been prouder.